Coming to you from Dinah's Chicken in Glendale, I'm Colin Marshall. This is the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. Today I'm sitting down with Michael Krikorian. Born and raised in Los Angeles, he's done extensive reporting on the crime and the gangs of Los Angeles, and he has a new novel out, his first, called Southside. Michael, can somebody understand Los Angeles who doesn't understand its gangs?
They could understand parts of the city, but not the entire city.
And that means more than the South Side, right? I mean, you know the gangs, you're getting to know much more of the city than the sort of fabled area below, say, the 10 freeway where some fear to tread.
Yes, but I mean, the gangs are all over Los Angeles. I mean, certain parts, way west Los Angeles, is not too obvious, but the influence and the tentacles of the gangs reach throughout the whole city.
Tell me a little bit. I mean, I want to ask about two different things here, which is, number one, your career reporting on crime and gangs. Number two, the career of your protagonist in Southside, Mike Lyons, the reporter, the Los Angeles Times reporter who gets shot, and this begins the whole involved story. But first, I'll ask about you. What was your first gang-related story?
In the newspaper or in my life?
Oh, well, actually, this is a good question. How far in your life does your getting knowledge of gangs precede your writing about them for the paper?
Well, we had gangs in our where we grew up in Gardena, and there were car clubs and gangs. But I grew up, and I went to Gardena High, and when I was in Gardena High, it was when at the time there was a gang. There was a killing on Sunset Boulevard at the Palladium. It was the first Soul Train concert. Wilson Pickett and Curtis Mayfield. And they were from Soul Train was in Chicago, and they came out here and they did this concert at the Palladium on Sunset near just east of Vine Street. And it was like the talk of the South Side, at least.
I can imagine what it must have been.
Yeah. So the concert was in April 1972. After the concert, these three guys were walking across Sunset Boulevard, and one of them had a long a maxi coat, like a long leather jacket, something Shaft would wear, right? So these guys came up to him and said, "I like that coat," and the guy says, "I like it too." He said, "You don't understand. I want that coat." And his friend, who wasn't wearing a leather coat, who had a suit on, who was a high school football player from L.A. High, dad was a lawyer, his name was Robert Ballou Jr., he came back, and there's a little confusion about what happened, but he went a little past them, and he was stomped to death right there. And because of where it happened in Hollywood, it was like big news. I have the paper clippings from the Herald, and I remember it, and it was this little-known gang at the time. They're called the Crips. And at the time, there used to be one gang called the Crips. At this time, there was the East Side Crips, Raymond Washington. That was the founder of the Crips. There was the West Side Crips and the Compton Crips. So it was such big news that it sort of became recruitment for the gang. And
that's the very story that opened up the eyes of future gang members to this gang.
Well, it would have happened. This is how it happened in terms of in Watts, South Central, the Crips were already just the rest of the city hadn't heard about him. I mean, the detective that I interviewed, I'm working on a story about this. He was in an interview room with a witness, and the witness told him, I don't know anything. His grandma was there. The witness's grandma said, she slapped him, said, "Tell the man what you know. Tell the man what you know." He slapped him again. This detective said, "Whoa." And finally he said it was the Crips. And then the detectives are like, "What's the Crips? What are Crips?" Anyway,
question they'd never ask now. That's for sure.
The gang grew, in part because of the publicity. Hey, it's cool to be a Crip, and they took over a lot of small gangs. And some gangs resisted, and they eventually formed a loose confederation called the Bloods. there is no gang called the Bloods. It's a confederation. There is no more gang called the Crips. There's 200, 300 gangs called the Crips, and they fight each other. So, people, they ask me, they say, if I say I write about crime or I write about gangs, if they're a little old lady from Iowa, they'll say the Crips and the Bloods, right?
But even they know those names.
Yeah, I'll say, I don't want to get into it. No, it's, 6-0 and, rape and all that.
Right. Crips kill Crips, Bloods kill Bloods, as well as on each other.
Mm-hmm.
From what perspective were you viewing this story as it happened in 1972?
I was just, high school student, and, it's just, and I had seen and heard about the Crips, so, it's kind of, it was big news in Los Angeles.
Was it what fascinated you about gangs to begin with? Was it from then on? Were you watching what was going on with gangs, or was it later? Was it only later?
You couldn't really help but notice back then, you hear more and more about it. Our school, Gardena, had some Crip gangs and a Mexican gang called G13, mostly Mexican. And plus the movies, when you're a kid, all the old movies, you're kind of, not gang related, but, Hard Times, Dead End Kids, Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney.
all the way back.
Front, that was my favorite movie,
At the time in high school, did these gangs seem like an actively threatening presence to you, or just kind of like, those are those guys over there?
It wasn't threatening to me. On our street, in fact, it's in the book, St. Andrew's Place. My neighbor was the Samoan family, and there was a guy that lived there named Blinky, and he was, to this day, about as, I don't know if you can cuss on your show, but he was the baddest motherfucker, And I mean, he could. Nobody would bother St. Andrew's Place. Blinky was there. Blinky went on to be a Marine, and I remember when he came home from the Marines, he was a Marine recon guy, and it just when he was Samoan, but he wasn't a really wide Samoan. He was like about 6'3", 6'4", 240, just and fast. And when he came home in that Marine uniform, you came to the neighborhood, it was like, what a sight, Blinky. I got to track him down.
Tell me how you got from there to having the desire to write about gangs in a journalistic way.
Well, I didn't, I always loved to write, make up stories and write, and briefly it was on the school paper just for my junior year, sports editor, and we won the city championship in football one year. But I like to write, and then I would send out, queries to magazines and get all those rejections, the nice rejections and some just straight out rejections. And finally I got a thing with Cycle News to cover a motocross race in Santa Maria. And that was my very first byline. And then I wrote a fiction story for Cycle News, and they don't publish fiction. And they took it, and it was such a good feeling to see that story in the Cycle News. It was about a famous old Belgian motocross racer, Joël Robert, him and Roger de Coster. So anyway, I think I got $20, and that was quite a thrill.
Did they say what about it made them want to run their first piece of fiction ever?
I don't know if it was their first piece. I've never seen any fiction in there. This was 1973.
A rarity in any case, but something about it made them want to run it.
It was such a, I don't know, unusual piece, and just something that hadn't been done. It was about how this famous motocross racer who won all these championships was having a horrible year, and a combined mafia of motocross racers had infiltrated his system, and it was bizarre. I still have that story.
Now, what made you want to write about a subject you'd been covering journalistically with fiction as well? What made you think, there's something I want to talk about this, but I want to be able to combine real and imagined. Do you know what I mean? What made you want to do that as well? Typically, the border is starker, journalist to fiction writer, or maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Well, I just, you like the truth, like the history, and then to modify the history and make it up was just so much fun.
Work from a basis of truth.
Yeah. Work from a basis of truth. The book is that way. It's a fictional book. I didn't get shot, but, and I'm not ruining anything because that happens in the first few pages. But, it's just nice to play with history, and I love history, and I love fiction, so.
In the book, early on in the book as well, there's a few points thrown out about gangs in Los Angeles that are just basic things. People don't tend to know if they're not covering gangs, if they don't watch gangs, if they don't live near where the gangs are or go near where they are. The people who would say, down below the 10, that's where the gangs are, I stay away from there. They don't know that, for example, another major dividing line is the 110, the Harbor Freeway. The gangs themselves see that as a great divide, do they not?
The dividing line, there in Los Angeles, there's a lot of east sides and a lot of west sides.
Right.
To some people, Highland is the east side.
Yes. Some people, the 405 divides it.
Some people, the 405. I have a friend, Bobby, he says nothing east of Lincoln,
That's bold.
Yeah. But, and the traditional east side to me, growing up here, is east of the LA River, downtown. But in the south side, the Harbor Freeway sort of divides it. Some people might say Broadway, but the west side, Hoover Street is the west side. Vermont, Western, Normandy, they're all west side. And you could tell by the writing on the wall, WS Hoover Street, West Side Hoover.
Right. These qualities are there. They're indicated. They're there.
Yeah. And the east side is if you ask somebody from 88 and Central, which plays a key role in my book, they'll say they're from the east side.
Right. There's different psychological territories, you might say, in Los Angeles. Where you're based determines what you think Los Angeles is, how you carve it up.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of east sides, west sides.
Right. Mm-hmm. Growing up in Gardena, how did you conceive of Los Angeles? What did the map look like to you then? And did you think of yourself as being on the south side, being in something separate from that? Where would you say you were?
I just didn't think of it that way. I just thought it was, Gardena, and I thought it was St. Andrew's Place. We had this mix in our neighborhood of ethnically mixed neighborhood. And
what ethnicities were there?
Huh?
What ethnicities were there?
Well, I'll talk about Samoans, Mexican Americans, Japanese Americans, Filipinos. I said in the book, if there's Jews, and I didn't know they were Jews, they just looked like white people to me. They had blue Christmas lights, and my dad, told me about blue Christmas lights. They like blue. Armenian, me. We were the only Armenian family, but white people. And at school, black people. We didn't have any black people on our block, but it's just a good mix of people, and everybody got along, and we just played football, in the street every day, baseball.
It's one of those settings in Los Angeles where there's all types, all ethnicities, and they really do have to get along. They're not in their own separate areas like you see in some other parts of Los Angeles, right? There's not that sort of voluntary, almost, segregation.
Yeah, I really learned about, at Watts, that's where I kind of very dear, close to me in terms of my reporting, but a connection, deep connection to Watts. I was there yesterday, and when I was on my 11th birthday, August 12th, 1965, we were in the Pirates. We played baseball at the park, Recreation Park on Normandy, and we won our park championship. I was first baseman, a relief pitcher, all-star, I do say. And so we were going to go out and play for the city championship. On August 12th, our coach, Charlie, calls us all together. And I still remember almost within a matter of feet where we were. And I'm thinking he's got everybody together for my birthday, And he says the city championships have been canceled. Riots broke out in Watts last night. So that was sort of my first, Watts connection, and then my dad, during the riots, my mom's parents lived in Eagle Rock, so we would drive along the Harbor Freeway to go visit them. And then my dad, we had a station wagon. My dad made me and my sister Janine lie on the back, lie down, because there were
get down.
snipers on the Harbor Freeway. My sister, she always said, like, that's all right, but how about if you get hit and you're driving and we crash?
Right.
So, me and Watts go back. Like a few years later, my cousins, Dave and Jeff, jumped a freight train in Gardena. And it was one of them freight trains that had a caboose. I don't know if most freight trains had it, but this one did. So we jump on it, and train man comes out, and he goes, I don't care if you guys are on the train, but I want to let you know this train is going to Watts.
Right.
We jumped off. You know?
This train's going to Watts to you meant what at that time?
It's dangerous.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have friends who went into Watts and had a bad time, had a bad experience, or just it was just the word on the street?
Just Watts, back. This is, a couple years after the riots, 3 years maybe, and Watts had a world famous reputation as a rough place. Still does. But about maybe fast forward 8 years from that, I'm working in Gardena on Western Avenue, and a friend there says, I'm having a party tonight. Why don't you come? And he says, I got to tell you, it's in Watts. And I went, and I had a great time, and I've been going there ever since.
I see. From that point, that party, you realized not that Watts was a completely harmless place, because we know it's not completely harmless, but you realized what about it?
I had fun, it was like it was exciting to be there, and I had a good time, and people were good, and it was dangerous. There was that element too, and I kind of stuck out with my complexion.
I mean, I
can't tell on the radio, but I'm not the darkest guy in town.
I wonder, though. I mean, it seems like Watts is one of those places, and I mean, I'm down there with some frequency too to take friends to Watts Towers, for example, or to eat at the Watts coffee shop, the one that's inside that school there, which I like a lot. It feels like it's safer to be a total outsider in Watts than to be an insider almost. I mean, when you hear tell me if this is true or not, the perception is it's more dangerous to be an insider in Watts in that, especially if you're a gang member. But if you live down there, you have a higher chance of, on any given day, having trouble than if you're someone from as far west as you want to go. Is that true?
Well, the insiders are in Watts during the day. They're not there at night usually. I mean, the outsiders. Like, you don't go to Watts Towers at night, or you don't.
It's not open at night, certainly.
Right, but you don't go to Nicholson or Drape Street at night. So, the thing about Watts that Watts is the proudest community in Los Angeles. I don't even think that it's close. I mean, they're just proud to be from Watts. There's a sense of community that I don't see anywhere else in town. I was at a party. This was like a year ago at somebody's house in Pasadena, friend's house, and I was sitting next to a guy, like I always do. He said, "Where are you from?" And he kind of hammed and hawed, and I said, "Well, I'm from Beverly Hills." Like
shamefully.
Yeah. And I said, you're from like the city that people like kind of sort of dream about living in, and you're ashamed of it. But I go to Watts, and if you ask somebody from Watts where they're from, they're so proud. I'm from Watts, It's just this community. People know each other. I was there the other day. They had a bunch of people they got a bus ride together. These, went out to the just to get away for the elders and some of the kids.
Now, how did you get from writing about cycle races to writing about murders and gang affairs?
Well, the key element is my cousin Greg Krikorian, who worked at the Times. He had worked at the Herald Examiner, and he was like the real journalist in our family, and he worked at the Times, and I had been writing, but not, ever since that cycle news thing. I don't know if I had a piece, and I got away from writing. I'd still write, but just for myself. And I would eat well, though. That was my thing. One of my things was going to restaurants.
How could it not be in Los Angeles?
Yeah, but now, I would go to Europe to eat. I'd save up money. I worked at.
That's real eating.
Yeah, I worked at Hughes Aircraft for a while, and I made decent money. So I was going to, I'd go to eat. I'd eat well. And so they needed somebody to write a small restaurant reviews in the different sections, like the South Bay section of the Times. Back then they had the City Times, South Bay, they had one in Long Beach. So my cousin said, my cousin, me, knows about restaurants. Let him write one. So they said, well, try one out. It was the Spoon House. It's a Japanese spaghetti house on Redondo Beach Boulevard. Still there, Gardena. So I wrote a review for that, and they liked it. So I started doing that. And I got $60 a review, because I had to pay for my own food.
Right.
I remember one time I spent $70 on food. So I was down $10. Yeah.
Only $10 out of pocket.
Yeah.
Not so bad.
So it was a nice, felt good to get that byline,
It must have taken you all over town, too.
Well, it first started in the South Bay, and then it was in the Southeast, which was Long Beach, and then downtown. So not too much. But I would always go drive around anywhere. For years, I worked as a messenger, driving, delivering packages. So I knew the city well that way.
Everything you did took you around.
Yeah, I know town well. And then from there, it became a regular thing. Sometimes it'd be 2 restaurant reviews a week, and then they needed a similar thing for the city hall, city council, just to digest. Talk about a paragraph what they did. Construction on a new on-ramp or a reward offered for a killing. So that got me into the city council, which also got me into the building because I worked down at the Times in the office.
Right. Not a far walk from City Hall when you're at the Times.
Yeah.
All this time, you were writing about other things. I mean, were you looking to get into writing about crime? Were you thinking, it'd be really fascinating to write about the gangs, to write about where that type of action is? Or were you not thinking about it?
I really wasn't thinking about it, writing about it as a journalist. It wasn't for my cousin Greg, like I said, you wouldn't be talking to me probably. So I was writing fiction and not getting anywhere, and but not writing, that much. Was working and having fun and traveling and kind of enjoying life, experiencing life, which is good for a writer.
Right. It's certainly a necessity for any kind of writer, but a fiction writer especially.
Yeah.
Tell me, what is it? How do you think profiling a gang member differs from profiling any given celebrity, for example? Is a profile when you're dealing
more interesting?
More interesting, certainly. When you're dealing with gangs and gang members, are you doing something different in kind than other types of journalism, or just
doing what?
Something different in kind than other types of journalism? Is it completely different, or is it just applying journalistic methods to gang type subjects?
Well, I wouldn't know the other end of talking to a celebrity. I mean, I see them at the restaurants, the restaurant, and I don't know. It's just that's a different world. I mean, I'm not enthralled with somebody that pretends to be a killer as opposed to somebody who is a killer.
Right. Right. It's true. I mean,
like the governor here got elected because people thought he was the Terminator. It's pathetic, And,
I see what you mean. Tell me about some of the first killers you talked to in person.
Well, the way I got into covering Watts was they needed somebody, but there was a killing. The LAPD had killed a guy in Jordan Downs. This guy named Chubby. This was like in my 90s sometime. And I think he was on PCP or something like that, and he had a knife and he was cutting himself, so the story goes, they didn't want him to, the good quote from the lady at Jordan Downs was, they didn't want to the police didn't want him to hurt himself, so they killed him.
Ah, yes.
Mm-hmm. And the projects were up in arms, and nobody wanted to go there, and I said, I'll go, so I went down there, I got the story, and that's how, I started covering Watts, really. Me and Matea Gold, she works for the Washington Post now. She just joined there a few months ago. She was my pod mate, and we joked that she was the East LA bureau chief, and I was the Watts bureau chief.
This is a concept, or that's a term you use in Southside, pod mate. You get somebody. What first of all, what is a pod, and how do they assign your pod mate at a paper?
I'm not sure how they assigned it. I had a good. Me and Matea had the best one because we were right near the bathrooms, and everybody would come by. This in the time, and everybody would have to go to the bathroom and stop by. And then we had a bulletin board that we I was close with the photographers there, especially Carolyn Cole and Clarence Williams, and other photographers there, Gennaro, and they would put up their photographs that didn't get into paper, and it would be like a bulletin board of photographs right by me and Matea's desk. And then on top of it, I would go to Phillips Barbecue, and I would put the ribs in the drawer of my desk, and people would walk by and smell the ribs. I remember, like Bob Sipshit, I remember he'd just walk by and open my drawer and take a rib out. So we had a cool area of the pod. It wasn't like, where Bill Boyarsky, that's city editor was, but, all the good reporters. But, it was fun. We had some fun there.
Now, Mike Lyons, the protagonist of Southside, is also a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. Tell me about what it's like in his pod.
The main thing is, his beat is sort of forgotten. And, there's some truth to that, that the people in his beat matter as much as the people in Holmby Hills. And that's kind of what drives him. It's that they matter. It's like, I remember Michael Connelly's main guy, Harry Bosch. I think his mantra is everybody counts,
Michael Lyons covers the South Side. It seems, well, you lay it out in the book. The calculus is like, if there's a killing on the South Side, okay, but who got killed? And, if the killing happened somewhere farther north, farther west, then we give it more space in the paper. How does it work? If there is a murder, the farther south it is, the less space it gets. The farther north it is, the more space. But other things as well. Tell me what's most illustrative about that sort of journalistic phenomenon where if someone white gets killed on the South Side, that gets 2 more inches. What have you? How does that work?
Well, how it works is, and I get it to agree. Like, if there's killing, remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, there was a lady that got killed in Beverly Hills at night. She was a PR lady. And it was news, and it should be news. I get that it's news, and it's big news. What he doesn't get, and it's why that isn't any news. There was a man killed here on a couple Sundays ago, 74-year-old man, Herman Johnson, worked for the city. Always did a walk. His neighbor said the nicest neighbor you could have. Sunday morning, he's out for his morning walk. Somebody shoots him in the back of the head on Western Avenue, 37th Street. Did you hear about that?
I think I have. I think I haven't read in detail about that.
Yeah, as far as I know, I was the only one to write about it. But that's how he feels too. So there's some similarities too.
Right.
To a degree, the very word news is something new. Right. So their line of thinking is, that's not news. Right. But it is,
Right.
It doesn't happen 10 times a day. Nowadays it happens maybe not even once a day.
Right.
So, it's a life. That guy, whoever it was, had a mother, maybe had kids, had friends. The killer had kids. What happened to him? What propelled him to shoot? He tries to get into the mind of the... not just a gang member. Who was that person?
In any such story, there are a number of converging stories to tell, then.
Yeah. You branch it out. Who's investigating it? Who's affected?
How much less dangerous a place is Greater Los Angeles now than the one you grew up in? Does it feel less dangerous?
I've been here so long, and people have gone away say, wow, Los Angeles has changed so much. To me, it hasn't changed. When you're here, it's like, it's so gradual to change, it hasn't changed that much to me.
It feels like it's still essentially the same place as it was in 1972 to you?
Traffic back then, more traffic now, traffic on Sundays now, and it's more sprawl, but I don't know, this hasn't really changed. If you're in it, I couldn't say, sure, there's been changes, different ethnicities are here now. There's little Bangladesh,
There's certainly I think of where I live, Koreatown, which was just getting started in the early 1970s, was it not? I mean, new neighborhoods have, to some degree, emerged, right?
Yes, I mean, like where I grew up in Gardena, the Asians were almost all Japanese.
Right.
Some Chinese, but I didn't know what a Korean. I mean, I didn't know any Koreans.
Right. Now you can't not know at least a few of them. I mean, they've had such an impact on Los Angeles. But tell me, in Southside, as you mentioned, Mike Lyons gets shot himself early in the book. Not killed, shot, so he can still be the protagonist. What does it mean to a character like that who has covered so many shootings to take a bullet himself?
Painful.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just like, that could happen to me. I think he felt, that I was always in danger, and here it came. So it wasn't. And in the book, there's his colleagues, they're very stunned at the beginning, and there's some tears, but then they get hey, let's get a pool. Who shot this guy?
Yes, exactly. The office pool starts up, and we see early on that there are a variety of opinions in the office about Mike Lyons. Some people think he's the best they've got. Some think he's overrated. It's what kind of a man draws such a range of judgments from his colleagues?
Well, I think he's a personable guy with his colleagues, his immediate colleagues, with authority, be it an editor or any kind of authority. I don't think he's a fan of, and they're not fans of his. Mm-hmm.
What does he do that they don't like?
Well, for one thing, he doesn't kiss ass, at all. If you don't say hello to him, he's not going to say hello to you, You're not going to, here's such and such an editor, I better be nice to them. Like, he could give a fuck about an editor. There's good editors, though, too, so they're just no different than anybody. I think he treats the people, a biggest editor, the same as he would the biggest janitor,
They're all just people around him.
Yeah. It's just, the janitor might be more interesting than, the city editor.
Right. What about these qualities makes him a good Southside crime reporter?
I think his past and his understanding of that community. And, his father in the book, was almost a Hells Angel. He was a mechanic for the Oakland Hells Angels. He had his dad went to Vietnam. There were some rough times for them. And so he kind of knew a little bit of the dark side of life. He didn't grow up, in Brentwood and, go to journalism school.
Right. It was not a sheltered upbringing for Mike Lyons. Tell me, in your own career reporting on crime and on gangs, is it the case that the closer you are to these communities, the more ties you have, absolutely the better?
No doubt. I mean, I say that the further you get away from Watts, the worse it is. In terms of, if you tell somebody from Chatsworth, you're going to Watts, and they say, "What? You going to Watts? What the fuck is wrong with you?"
Right. They think of it as something that you just wouldn't do. But have you ever felt that even though you need to get closer and closer to these communities where the gangs are to do your job, that you, like Mike Lyons, were thereby putting yourself in more danger the more close you were to everybody down there?
Yeah, but danger, I mean, compared to what? Compared to Fallujah, it's not dangerous, compared to what's going on in Aleppo right now and Damascus, so I wouldn't, I don't think it's dangerous,
And you do have to keep that, if you have a global perspective on it, it doesn't seem so bad down in Watts, does it?
No, it doesn't. But, for Los Angeles, and not just Watts, the Green Meadows is a neighborhood where the book is set more in Green Meadows, which is the neighborhood just north of Watts. And I kind of got a kick out of some of the neighborhoods the city has for rough parts of town. They tried to get away from the stigma of South Central.
Yes.
And I mean, there's a neighborhood there called Canterbury Knolls.
Canterbury Knolls, I've never heard of that one.
It's like 60th and Western. There's Century Palms, there's Century Cove, Green Meadows.
How do these get their names?
I don't know, man. But Canterbury Knolls, that's one of my
Takes the
favorites.
cake.
Yeah. Athens well known, though, Athens Park. And there's a few others, but yeah. But anyway, this one is in Green Meadows. The book is, a lot of it's set in Green Meadows. And it's on the very first page of the book, a setting in... But, you just got to get to know the community. He gets to know the community, and just trying to tell the other side of the story.
What does it...
Not from so much the police side of the crime story.
Right.
I mean, that's an easy way to do it. I mean, and that's the way you need to do it. I got some friends in the port. One of my best friends, Sal La Barbera, the homicide detective in South Bureau. L.A. Murder Cops is Twitter. He'd want me to tell you that. You have to know the police as well as the other side. I mean, ideally, you can't just tell the gang side, although, and sometimes the people, not just the cops, but people I know say, why are you close with those guys? They're criminals. And it's like I tell them. One gang member, Clement Johnson, Big Evil, is like a legendary gang member. I said, I write about gangs. If I wrote about baseball, I'd want to get to know Sandy Koufax.
Right, exactly. They're players. They're big players.
Yeah.
What does it take to get a gang member to open up to you, to tell tell you their story? How long a process is that to get to that point where they're going to tell you things that you can use, things you can make into a story?
It's a long time. It takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of respect. It takes, not leaving the first time they say, get the fuck out of here.
You have to stay where you are.
If you leave, then, you can forget about ever coming back.
Just a test? They want to see if you...
I don't know if it's a test. I mean, a lot of times they mean it. It's not... A lot of guys, especially young people, they can't grasp the concept of what you are. I'm a reporter. They don't... some of them, they don't get it. And then also, like, what station, what they think is a television, or, and their idea of the news is from television, local television news.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned the television, because reading this book, my mind was on newspaper reporting, of course, but television news is huge here. I've never tuned into Los Angeles television news, I think partially because you hear, people will talk about it as in describing it as essentially a way to convey cheap scares, terror in the Southland, death in the Southland, murder in the Southland, film at 11. I hear it's all a lot of that. Is that true?
Yeah.
Why is it like that?
I don't know. I guess that's what gets the ratings up.
Yeah.
It's just, that's another thing. I mean, I got some friends in that world too, but they're not proud of that, some of the stuff that goes on. And what gets news on the television is, I think that what was it? One homicide I was on, and there was no news about it. It was a kid from Indiana who came out here, got his heart broke in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His girlfriend cheated on him. He came out here, and his mom and sister were worried about him. They bought him a bus pass and a train pass, and don't walk around. And he didn't tell them how dangerous where he was at. And one day he's walking, he's got waiting for the bus on Figueroa near Imperial Highway, and he sees somebody he knows, and so he goes. He doesn't have a bus pass, so he walks with him on Figueroa at 108. He gets shot and killed. Right? His mom and sister come out. They got this heartbroken story about this kid. No news on TV news, but Lindsay Lohan's mother arrived late in a Rolls Royce for her court date about a DUI or some.
Oh my!
That was news. That kind of thing,
There is, I mean, the whole "if it bleeds, it leads" thing is common to all forms of journalism, I suppose. But it seems like on television,
that's a cliche. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of bleeding that doesn't get leading.
Right, it's certain kinds of bleeding that lead, as you illustrate in Southside. But it does seem like when I hear what television described, there's kind of a, not just about the murders, but like the sense of there's a scary place down south you should all worry about. That seems to be the vibe people talk about when they describe the news. I don't know if you think that is in the zeitgeist, but that seems an unproductive way of covering it, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know what zeitgeist means, but
Popular mind, I suppose.
The other thing about them, they got 40 seconds to cover a story, so. And they're packing it in. You got to get the weather and the barometric pressure, or whatever that means. I don't know why they got to mention that, but they can't get into a story.
And then they got to cut to commercial.
Yeah, they got to go to a commercial. So I don't want to put them down too much. So it's
right. They're kind of forced into saying things are scary down there and leaving it at that. It's not any one person's fault.
How you get your news, then that's on you.
Yeah. So there's better ways to do it, and it seems like. Well, tell me, Mike Lyons, what type of news story does he advocate? What type of reporting does he hope to do? Does he aim for, even if it gets cut down a bit, literally or figuratively in the process? What are his ideals journalistically?
I think ultimately he wants to. I mean, on this he gets waylaid into trying to find out who shot him.
He's in trouble quick. Yes,
but it's the good in the community in the Southside. It's the people that. You don't hear about that are trying to make the community better. Like two real life guys, Big Donnie and Big Hank from Nickerson Gardens. I mean, they are they're heroes. So, they should be nationally known. They try and keep, they're like 50 years old, tough guys, one-hitter quitters, which is a guy that hits you one time and you quit. And, they talking to the young kids out there, don't go through this madness of, this revolving thing of killing one, back and forth. It's going on right now. And, so the community, and that it's all just one the whole city, it's one city, it's one huge community, ideally.
That can be easy to forget with a city like Los Angeles. I mean, especially here, it's hard to get your mind around it, let alone to think of it as a community.
Kurt Streeter from the Times had a nice piece yesterday in the paper about these tennis kids from Jefferson High who, I don't know how they got there, but somebody invited them to the Beverly Hills Tennis Club. And, it was just a nice story about, it's all one big community. They helped them out. They had a bunch of one of the tennis players there was playing tennis in his boots or her boots, and so they got new shoes and tennis rackets, and that's a nice kind of like part of what I think Lions would like ultimately, to have you're doing well, good for you. I'm very fortunate myself, and so is he in the book. And
he feels like he's less fortunate the moment the bullet hits him, but he sees advantages in that as well. I mean, that's a part of the thought here, is that he sees that it's not all bad the way, because he didn't die, he didn't get permanently injured. He sees what's not all bad about it.
What's not all bad about getting shot?
Yes, well, to Mike Lyons' mind. I mean, he talks about it.
Yeah, I don't recommend it to be shot, but there are in that world, if you're not hurt badly, if you got grazed last night, you tell your friends, hey man, I got shot last night, you'd have a story to tell.
Right.
And in the book, it's like this certain badge. It's like the Marine in Ramadi or somewhere who is wounded, comes back to battle. There's a certain, I don't know if mystique is the word, but there's something about being shot, and this is his thinking. But it's a bravado that when it comes down to it, I don't want to get shot.
He joins the league of guys who get shot. Yeah,
it's very easy to say, but it's just talking. But when you actually, get shot, and nobody wants to get shot.
Right. He then joins. I mean, when he joins a certain, he rises to the ranks of the guys who have been shot, the ones who have put themselves, who have been in that kind of danger, and even among the people he's covering, the gang members who have been shot, they're in a different class than the ones who haven't been, right?
Yeah, they are. Although some of the most storied gang members that I know and in the book have never been shot. One of the guys in the book says, "Hey, I'm the king of the Hoovers. I've never been shot. I got all the respect in the world." Right. So you don't need to be shot. Ideally, you don't want to be shot. Right. People are looking at me like, "What the fuck is he talking about?"
Yeah, it's the guys who have come through essentially unscathed. Who gets the? How do you get the most respect in that community if you're in that world? If you come from being a gang member, what are the ways those guys get the most respect other than survival, which is pretty impressive in these contexts?
Well, you have to be good with your hands, number one. That means you have to be a good fighter. You can't go to the gun, and you have to be intelligent and charismatic and leading and respect. It's a lot of things, but mainly, you can't just, if you're the, 6'5", 300-pound black belt, that's not enough. That helps.
Yes.
But
that couldn't hurt.
But, you got to be intelligent. The gang leaders that I've known, they're not stupid. They're not, they're sharp, They might have guys with them that are bigger than them and stronger, but the actual shot caller, usually, not all the time, but some of them that I've known are, if in a different world, they could have been a CEO somewhere,
They're not quite the image of the gang member as being dumb and impulsive. These are the ones who, maybe some gang members are, surely, but the guys at the top, they could do anything.
They're like, a few of them, they're a combination of guys from The Wire.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with The Wire.
I've seen a bit of it, but would you consider that to be many call it a very accurate program in terms of the way it deals with crime, law enforcement, all that? Would you say the same?
The Wire just about cost me my relationship because all I would do was watch it over and over again, and she'd come home and said, "Not the same episode of The Wire again." So,
it's a true endorsement.
So, me and The Wire is just like, there's nothing to compare to it.
What does it get right? What is so right about The Wire?
Well, first the writers are some of the best crime novelists. George Pelecanos was involved with it. It's just...
And David Simon comes from reporting.
He's a reporter, and then, just the casting and just it's just, I don't know, it's just everything about it. It's just, nothing compares. That's my world, too, so...
What do you remember from it? Something that you could point to and say, or you said the first time, that's absolutely right. No one else has got that right, but this is my world, and they understand this part of my world that no other film, television seems to. It's what is especially truthful about The Wire?
God, there's so many different parts of it. To point out one thing, there's one shootout, I think in season 3, and it's such this wild shootout, and there's so many bullets being fired, and nobody gets hit. The only person that gets hit is a baby, up in being, stashed away by her mom, on the second floor, and it's just, it's not like regular movies where 5 people get killed. That's just one. Every single episode, there's things in there about. What it's like, That's just
Tell me about the balance, or how you wanted to integrate truth and fiction in Southside, because there's real things, real places, real people in here. There's also fictional people, fictional events. How did you want to do that? When you started out, what were you thinking in terms of, I want to pull this much straight from reality, and I want to bring this much in from my imagination? How did that work for you?
Well, I wanted it to be, my imagination, just based on what I knew as the truth. Right. So it's just a combination. It may have been more fun to, I don't know about more fun, but to write a totally thing that was just no basis of reality to it. But for me, I couldn't do that. Maybe one of these days I can, and I have. Years ago when I was a kid, but I just wanted it. Maybe The Wire was an influence, but I was writing it. While The Wire, I didn't. Before The Wire and during The Wire. So I guess The Wire wasn't an influence. Now that I think about it,
Is there, for everything that happens in this book, is there some reference you can point to in reporting things you heard about, things you saw happen, Are there versions of everything that happens in this book that happened in real life? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it all?
Well, some of it, like a lot of it happened in real life. Like, there's a photographer, Boris Yarrow, and he took one of the pictures of Bobby Kennedy bleeding at the Ambassador Hotel. It's a famous shot. Anyway, I drank a lot on the job, and I think he smelled whiskey on me, and he came over and said, "Man, you got to drink vodka. It doesn't smell."
That's the advice he gives to Mike Lyons here.
Yeah. So that happened. Things happen, and you realize that vodka doesn't smell like whiskey, but it still fouls your mouth a little bit. But a lot of it happened. A lot of it,
It all could happen, though. It's all grounded in.
It wasn't in the story if it didn't go. Just because it happened, it didn't blend in with what happened. In the book, it went. The things that go in, there was a lot of things I considered, but it didn't go in.
Right, exactly. It's what's fascinating.
There was a lot of made up stuff that I wanted in, but they didn't go in. Like that old saying about taking out the best parts or your babies or.
If anything's particularly good, worry about that part, because that might be the one that fools you. But tell me how big a reader of crime novels have you been?
I'm a slow reader, I'm not well read with the classics. The Iliad, the Odyssey, and Les Miserables. Those are my three favorite books. But in the 90s, I got into Michael Connelly.
Oh, yes. And he's blurbed your book, so that's come full circle.
Yeah. And I think it was Concrete Blonde. And then I went back and read all his books. And so I think that he was the one that first kind of got me into rereading and reading crime novels. Then from him, he went from Raymond Chandler to writing. I kind of went back to Raymond Chandler,
You went back to the classic Los Angeles crime novels.
Yeah, and then you could read Raymond Chandler right now. It's just beautiful. But then the other ones, Pelicanos, Robert Craig, James Lee Burke, John Sanford with the Prey books, that kind of thing. So, and I enjoyed reading those. I'm just a slow reader.
A careful reader, you could say.
But I like to read a nonfiction. Usually have a nonfiction going to. One of my all-time favorite books is Seabiscuit. I love that book.
What got you thinking you wanted to write specifically a crime novel?
I knew it. I know crime, and I wanted to know novels. So
that's where your head is. It's in the world of crime. Tell me then, reading all those crime novels you went back to, especially the ones about Los Angeles, what did they make you think was still possible? What was still ground that a crime novel needed to cover in Los Angeles? Because clearly you saw where one more story could be told. How did you realize that there was space for that additional Los Angeles crime story that's not like any of these others?
Well, like I said, I'm not that haven't read all the books, but all the detective books, this was more from a reporter than a detective. Well, Connelly wrote a book, The Poet, which I got into big time. So the element was combining the reporter with that part of town.
You make me realize I don't.
Walter Mosley writes about it and writes about it so well, but it's set earlier, and his guy is detective, right? Easy Rollins and Socrates and all those guys. I mean, I like those books big time, you know. But there's a more modern, a combination of reporter and the streets.
It is indeed extremely modern. It's set this very year, 2013. I mean, tell me about Los Angeles of right now as a setting for a novel. You mentioned that you don't think it's changed much, but surely you had to look pretty closely at how Los Angeles is at this moment. And you must have seen something about what it's like right now that is different about this period than any other period. You have to identify that to set a novel there. A novel here and now, I suppose.
Well, what is different about L.A. than, say, 20 years ago? Was like yesterday, this guy, Nick, he's a bartender, Moza. He asked me what I did. I was telling him about a couple of killings that I heard about. And he goes, well, it's a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And in terms of numbers, yeah, it is. Unless you're the one that gets shot, So, in terms of numbers, there used to be 2,000 killings a year in the county here. Right now, it's, I think, close to 500. For them 500, So, I don't know what's changed is more awareness, more community involvement, more in Watts than other parts. The downtown is supposedly changing, and there's more places downtown, but we've been hearing that all my whole life. I mean, it's never going to be Chicago or New York. I don't care what they say. San Francisco, but it's our city. I love it.
It's not given away by his name necessarily, but Mike Lyons is Armenian American. Half indeed, but is half Armenian. That still counts as Armenian American, does it not? It's half Armenian American. Tell me what that means to him, that part of his heritage.
Well, I think what it means to him is that being that where he covers is black and Spanish, Mexican mainly, that he's not white, even though he's half white and he looks white, he thinks of himself as Armenian and, a connection to the Middle East, Armenia, not that Armenia is technically the Middle East, but that part of the world that he's not some white guy from Brentwood. There we go with Brentwood again, but, that even though your first impression of him over there on 88th Street or 89th Street is here's a white guy, his mind is that he's Armenian, which makes him a little, not so much the establishment.
Right. He has an identity. It is not just he's an outsider in the communities he covers, but he's not directly opposed. You know what I mean? He's not the opposition.
Yeah, I mean he tries to think that they don't know that he's not the opposition.
Yes, at least he has the psychological edge, but Armenians seem to me to be one of the best known of demographic groups here in Los Angeles, but maybe perhaps not as well known as, you mentioned that from various Spanish-speaking countries certainly, but also the Japanese or the Koreans. It feels like there's been more Armenian influence in Los Angeles than people even realize if they're not from that community. Would you say that?
Influence in terms of politics or government or business or
anything. I mean, it seems like
I think we're kind of underrepresented or I don't know about valued, but the influx of Armenians in the early '90s, from mainly when the Soviet Union was breaking up, it brought a lot of people to East Hollywood, and with that, it was the classic story of a handful of them were being protecting some who were being picked on, and they were originally defenders, and these defenders evolved into a street gang called Armenian Power. And it was a shock to the older school Armenians that Armenians were being arrested and being put in jail. 'Cause they were very proud that back in my Uncle Harry would tell me, like I think it was in the 40s, like there was no Armenians, somebody told me, I don't know if it's true, no Armenians in jail, Yeah.
That was a point of pride in any case, that we stayed out of trouble, the Armenians.
Now, if it's not that way anymore, right? So, it's part of being in a big city. It's the classic immigration story of the Lower East Side. The Irish coming in, or the Italians. That's what Armenians went through in East Hollywood. So, but there's the culture's there. It's Little Armenia, and we're in Glendale, right?
Right, exactly. I rode my bike through Little Armenia to get here, and we're in Glendale now. I mean, but you are so experienced in restaurant culture. Plus, you have an Armenian background. What people listening? Where do you recommend they go to eat Armenian food? Not even doesn't have to be a specific place, but neighborhoods or streets, or what should they keep in mind if they're going to eat Armenian food?
Well, my place is Carousel on Hollywood Boulevard in Normandy. So, I go there, and my girlfriend loves to get Polo Albras's Peruvian chicken place on 8th and Western.
I go there all the time.
You live right. You can walk there. Polo Albras, a roast chicken, and then like 4 meza from Carousel. Dips are like the muhammar, it's a red bell pepper will come.
She combines the two places into one.
Yeah, so we have like a spread of 4 or 5 dips, Armenian and Peruvian. It's a good at-home, small party, or 2 people dinner.
I feel like,
and for $30, you're set.
I feel like there's few more Los Angeles dinners you could have than that. Would you agree?
In Armenian, that's
It's what makes it an interesting place. I mean, that's representative of why it's an interesting place to set a novel, is it not?
There's so much here. I mean, you could write forever about the different cultures here. You know that.
I would guess you have plans to write
around us here. There's Marcella's Fashion, Dinah's Southern Fried Chicken, VK's Market. Who knows who that VK is?
Have you started writing the next one?
Yeah, I got. The plan was to write 4 books. The next one's West Side, set in Mapleton Drive in Homeby Hills, the most exclusive neighborhood. And then I'm almost done with that. So.
Can we expect the other 2 quadrants to make their appearances as well?
West Side and East Side. Who knows what happens?
Many parts of Los Angeles to cover. I've been speaking here with Michael Krikorian. He is the author of Southside and a longtime reporter on gangs and crime, native of Los Angeles. Michael, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast, coming to you from Dinah's Chicken in Glendale. I've been Colin Marshall. Find more from me at colinmarshall.org, more from the LARB at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.